Welcome to B Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find the flow in life and on the river. I'm Brad Burden. Join me as I talk to paddlers, athletes, and adventurers who are all seeking the flow. B Flow Session is brought to you by the brands that keep us in the flow: Dagger Kayaks, Sawyer Paddles, Stohlquist PFDs, and Level 6 Gear. Thanks to them for keeping us in the flow. Check them out and take your next adventure to the next level.
Welcome to the next episode of B-Flow Sessions. I'm your host, Brad Burton, and today I have the privilege of being joined by one of the greats in our sport. Matter of fact, a Olympic gold medalist, 1992 Olympian, Joe Jacobi. Joe, thanks for joining us on B-Flow Sessions.
Brad, I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited that you are doing this podcast and sharing the stories of the people who do our sport. I think it's absolutely wonderful. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, again, thanks for being here. So Joe Jacobi, like I said, is a 1992 Olympian, and him and his partner in situ won the gold medal in the Barcelona Games. His partner, Scott Strasbaugh, and he walked away with the gold, got to stay atop the podium, and hear the national anthem played. And we'll learn more and hear more about his Olympic experience, what that was like in a little bit. But Joe, start off by telling us how you found your flow in paddling.
Yeah, I love sharing this story. You know, I had this Malcolm Gladwell outliers moment. Gladwell wrote this terrific book about the fortuitous circumstances in our life that kind of shape our opportunities and performances. You know, he wrote about Bill Gates and Paul Allen having access to computer mainframes when they were in junior high school at a local community college that they worked on, learned how to program between midnight and 5 in the morning. Well, my Gladwell outlier moment was growing up in the Washington, D.C. area on the Potomac River. And it wasn't just that, it was about timing as well. So I started to paddle at the McEwen's summer camp, Valley Mill, in the late 1970s. And I really kind of took a liking to the sport in the early 1980s. And so when I say the McEwens, this was the McEwen family of Jamie McEwen, was the son of Roger and May McEwen, who had initially started the camp. Jamie won America's first ever Olympic medal in canoe slalom at the 1972 Olympics. And the way I found my way to this summer camp, which, by the way, Brad, many camps had open canoeing at that time in the United States, but very few had kayaks. But Tom McEwen, Jamie's brother, and Jamie himself, they built a lot of those boats in a local, in a little boat shop located on the camp property. And I learned to paddle in those boats. But what was really interesting, I think the part of the story I like to tell, was how I found my way to Valley Mill Camp. So I was raised in a family in Bethesda, Maryland. I had 3 older brothers and 1 younger brother. And there was a pretty big gap between my 3rd brother and myself, 7 years. And when my older brother, before I was born, was old enough to, be looked at after my dad, my mom was ready to get out of the house. And she joined a local theater group in Montgomery County, Maryland. And that little theater group was run by Roger McEwen, Jamie's father. And they became such good friends over the years. And Roger was like, Susan, your kids need to come to Valley Mill. And he was referring eventually to me and my little brother, Ben. And that's how it happened. Like, my mom just kind of needed this break from raising the 3 older boys and worked in this theater group and met the owners of the summer camp. And that was really kind of my big breakthrough to kind of finding flow in kayaking.
And how did that lead then to get, the DC Potomac area still is, I know, but especially 70s, 80s through the 90s was a hotbed for slalom training. How did your just general kayaking evolve into wanting to race and train for that?
So at the summer camp, we were qualifying for river trips out onto the Potomac River using the lake
Mm.
at Valley Mill. And they also had different like awards and recognitions the better you got. And eventually, when I was 11 or 12, Nikki Markoff and I, Nikki was Jamie McEwen's nephew, we got the red shirt together. And the red shirt was, the Valley Mill red shirt was the highest award you could get at the summer camp. And after we got that award in paddling and kayaks, Nikki and I said, oh, it would be fun to try to do that in a C2. But we were 12 years old and we were paddling in the C2 and just having a good time doing it. We could roll, we could, surf waves on the Potomac River. And somehow this got, the Bill Endicott, the legendary coach of the training group up there, had caught wind of this. So one summer day at camp, Norm Bellingham, this is before Norm became an Olympic gold medalist in flatwater canoe racing in 1988. So this was 1982. Norm come and pick us up at the summer camp, and Alex Markoff came with us too, Nikki's younger brother. And we're like, where we're going? And Norm just said, put your boats on the car. I'll tell you later. And we put our race boats on the car, and he takes us down to the Potomac River to the feeder canal. And it's like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a summer day. John Lugbill is there, Davey Hearn, Kathy Hearn, the Howlers, the Jarvis brothers, Bill Endicott is coaching. And like these legends that we've just seen in the annual Whitewater magazine that came out, like it was incredible. And the thing was, like, they treated us like we were the stars of the show for just coming out to this workout. And it was so funny, like Bill Endicott, like he was so nice to us, but he took one look at our equipment and he's like, okay, you're going to need a new boat. You're going to need new paddles, new life jackets. Like the technology's evolving so quickly. And it was really funny because after that workout, just a week later, the Jarvis brothers got together. They were the world champions in the C2, and their younger brother Todd was a kayak. They took one of their secondhand C2s and Todd one of his secondhand kayaks, and they put the two boats together, and they told the Markoffs and myself that we'll sell you both boats for a total of $300. So we each had to come up with $100 to buy these boats. And our parents helped us out, and that's how we got our first race boats. And it was amazing, like the influence of just these people and the way I think the lineage of the way people train and work out of that era and the way it got passed down, like it hit me early, like it hit me really early. And I was so lucky to be a part of that. And little did I know, like that was just the beginning of how all of those relationships were going to flourish in the years to come.
Wow. Yeah. When you mentioned the Malcolm Gladwell thing, the outliers, it made me think of people in our sport too, like EJ, Shane Benedict, Corin Addison, those three come to mind of like designers who also started their own company. They're all from about the same generation as well, where if they would have been born 10 years younger, 10 years later, would have missed that bubble. And then I think about my generation, like, in the freestyle world, like we hit that late 90s, early 2000 bubble where there was actual money in the sport and sponsors were paying us to go out on the road and competing. Again, 10 years younger, 10 years later, kind of missed that mark. So it's definitely interesting how where you're born and when matters a lot.
Well, I love that you mentioned EJ and Corin because EJ and Corin competed at the 1992 Olympics in slalom here in La Seu d'Urgell, Catalunya, where I live. And you're right. I mean, what they did for freestyle, just after the 92 Olympic period forever changed our sport. And I don't want to put words in the mouth of EJ and Corin, but what I feel at this time in my life is that EJ and Corin had like a really good ability and vision to see the conformity of slalom and the Olympic program and where that was going, for better, for worse. But I think they saw that conformity and they I think were very motivated to, to do something to counter that conformity. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever met two non-conforming paddlers in my life than EJ and Corin. But so maybe if they don't go to the Olympics and experience that, I think they both had an amazing experience at the Olympics. But I guess that is a huge part that contributed to what those two gave to our sport in that time, shortly after the '92 Olympics.
Right. Yeah. I kind of started with that 93 World Freestyle competition the next year on the Ocoee, and another slalom paddler, Scott Shipley, was a medalist in freestyle there. So a lot of crossover during that time for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there were. What was so interesting about that, and at the time of 1993 on the Ocoee, when the freestyle worlds were at Hellhole, that was just 3 years before the '96 Olympic Games on the Ocoee.
Right.
So there was already a lot of like international attention and vibe around the Ocoee. But I remember watching Scott Shipley at that Freestyle World Championships, and it wasn't that Scott was top freestyle paddler, but because the event was, you had a certain amount of time, to score points on the feature. And so if you got blown out of the hole, for most people, like, that was it. It took a lot of time to recirculate and get back up, and score more points. But Shipley, I think a huge advantage he had was that if he got blown out of the hole, his ability to not just get back up the eddy better, but to do it efficiently without losing all of his physicality.
Mm-hmm.
So he could arrive at the feature for maybe another 10, 12, 15 seconds of surfing and not be winded. Like, that was an amazing way that he was able to use his slalom skill and slalom fitness to put him in a position to score points on the feature. That was an amazing event, and there was a lot of the rivalry with Perception and Dagger during that time.
Yeah.
And I mean, the matchups and the differences in style, Mark Lyle and Bob McDonough, oh my gosh, it was unbelievable,
That's really cool. Yeah, I think it was definitely a pivotal moment in the sport, along with the '92 Olympics for slalom, because before that, slalom hadn't been in the Olympics for 20 years. Talk to us about your perfect flow, and I think that might include, maybe making the team or that gold medal run. But talk to us about, encompassing perfect flow there, but that whole Olympic experience and what that was like.
Well, yeah, there's so much to it. I mean, I think any of these pursuits that we choose on the river, whether it's just to run rivers for fun, maybe it's to push limits of paddling difficult whitewater, maybe it's an element of competition, and there's many to choose from. But listen, Brad, all of these are like a vehicle for personal growth and personal development. It's just we don't see that exact way that vehicle moves until maybe later chapters in our life. And so when I think about that question, I think about the different changes and evolutions that I went through. I think in the beginning, of course, we want to think that competition is just something fun and something we enjoy. And I think there's truth to that. But when you start to win medals and you start to stand on podiums and you start to get some success, then you also have to learn how to manage expectations and pressure, new areas of growth. And honestly, my canoe partner, Scott, and I think that was very challenging for us. And it was a big journey. I always say Scott and I we were wired very differently. We're two very different kinds of people. And we really had to work through a lot of things, but it was our diversity, it was our differences that made us really good. But to the extent that some of those difficulties happened, in the early 1990s, I think we were at a point where it wasn't a matter of whether we thought we'd make the Olympic team or not. It was just whether we would keep paddling or not. And the head of sports psychology from the U.S. Olympic Committee, Shane Murphy, actually came in and worked with us and gave us a lot of tools for how to work, how to work together, how to create a space, for really communicating with each other openly and honestly. And I know you as a coach will appreciate this. Also getting your ears like ready to listen to advice and feedback that may not be so flattering to you. When you paddle with someone and you're in a partnership and a collaboration with someone, like you got to prepare for that as well. And I think all of that and the level of coaching that we had around us, that support made such a big difference when it came time to, that final countdown before the Olympics and the Olympic runs here in Lascaux, and really being ready for that. So I think that would kind of be sort of the initial precursor to one of the really important things that Dr. Murphy, I think one of the important things that Shane Murphy did for us was he helped us build that space for how to communicate with each other and also be ready to get the ears ready to listen to, feedback that may not be so appealing to you. And I think that was part of it. And all of that really helped to kind of set up a better journey especially in the last 12 months leading up to the Olympic race, because we spent a lot of time training and racing here in La Selle-d'Urgell. We spent about 100 days here in this city in the year before the Olympics, over 5 different training camps and races, including the Olympics. And I think what was really unique about that, and ultimately, you asked about finding flow on the Olympic course. There was a test event here 1 year before the Olympics in 1991. And we, I had never been here before. And it was kind of a chance, not just for the athletes to try out the Olympic channel, but it was a chance for the organizer to work with, go through the stadium operations, spectators, timing system, boat measuring, all the stuff that goes along with the race. And I just remember arriving here in Lascaux. I liked it when I first arrived, but I just remember feeling as a sport that's anchored here in Europe, and the Americans, the U.S. team, living out of a duffel bag, and that was 7-8 weeks into our trip in 1991. We were tired, and I'm watching my competitors from Germany, Czechoslovakia, Great Britain. They're going home between World Cup races. They're sleeping in their home bed. They're eating mom's home cooked food. They're getting their clothes washed. It's none of that for us. And I just remember thinking that it's a year before the Olympics. When we come back when we're here a year from now for the Olympic Games, I don't want to feel like an American visitor in the Olympic Village. Like, I want to feel like a connection, here in Lascaux. And that just really set in motion something really important for me and the way I grew as a person. So the journey wasn't just about how to evolve on the water, but how it was to evolve here in La Selle-d'Urgell, in the transaction nature of like going to supermarkets and restaurants. Hey, I need to get this, I need to get fed, I need to get money, I need to get groceries. That changed to becoming like, building relationships with the people that lived here and feeling like, we were in our neighborhood. And that was really helped. A year later, when we were walking to the Olympic venue on the day of the race, like I really felt a sense of connection to Lascaux. And I think all of these things really helped us to get into a better space and increase the likelihood of being in flow when the 2 Olympic runs came about.
I asked you before when we talked about the Olympic experience, and you see on TV as somebody watching the opening ceremonies on the Olympics, and you mentioned you felt less of a connection to other athletes on the U.S. team, maybe the swimmers or the gymnast or whatever sport, but you felt more connected to obviously the U.S. paddlers, obviously, but even more connected to paddlers from all over the world than you did to an Olympic American gymnast, because these were some of your friends that you had traveled and competed against for years.
Yeah, I think it's one of the very best parts of the Olympic experience for me. And I think, by the way, we can talk about this in a moment, but I think this is going to happen again in Oklahoma City in
Mm,
2028 when
right,
Oklahoma hosts the whitewater competition 1,300 miles from Los Angeles. Like, I think it's going to
right,
be very, very much the same. But look, when I was paddling in the 1980s and the early 1990s, we were not going to Olympic training centers. There were no human-made whitewater channels. We trained
right.
on the Potomac River. We trained on the Nantahala. We trained on the Ocoee. Our cars were our locker room. We didn't train at Olympic training centers. We didn't have dining halls and dormitories. We had our, I had a Ford Escort and a tent. And I think that kind of camaraderie that you build with the other athletes in that process is amazing. So on the day of the opening ceremonies, the Olympic opening ceremonies in 1992, Liceu d'Urgell was about 2.5 hour bus ride from Barcelona. We were not on the bus with U.S. team athletes. We were on the
Right.
bus with all the slalom athletes here in Liceu. That's how we all went to the Olympic Games together. And I just remember seeing athletes like Mike Corcoran from Ireland, or Anne Boxell from France, or Danielle Woodward from Australia. And it was so easy to pick out all the slalom athletes, even though everyone's wearing the same uniforms. It's just that intuition that comes along with people on the river. You just kind of know
Mm,
who your people are as you look around, a stadium that has, 80,000 people in it, and there's another 10,000 athletes on the track and then on the field. It's so easy to pick out the other slalom athletes. Those were our people. Those are our people. And again, I think that's going to kind of repeat itself to some degree in 2028 in Oklahoma City.
what about a time, we call this flood? What about a time when things didn't go very well for you on the river, maybe in a competition or paddling recreationally, a time when things just weren't going well?
Yeah, I've had plenty of those experiences. I mean, in competition, I alluded to having this epiphany about how I felt in Laseo when I first arrived here in 1991, and that mind shift set from going from feeling like an American visitor to feeling like a sense of belonging. Well, that race happened 10 days later, and we had a horrible race. We
Mm,
flipped over in the middle of the course. We just had a really poor performance, and it just gave us like a really empty feeling in terms of paddling on the Olympic course. And what was so funny, Brad, was that I remember after the race, the thing about the course in Laseo, it's the only whitewater course in the world, the only place we race where 100% of the competitors walk to and from the river to wherever they stay in the town. Like, everyone
mm,
walks. You park the car when you arrive. You don't use your car again until you leave. But I remember walking back to the team hotel after that race, and like every bar we passed, in the street in Laseo, it was like there we were again in slow motion, Joe and Scott flipping over on the national television broadcast. And I think when those moments are highlighted in your life, and you have those insecurities that come along with being 21 years old, you're like, oh, this isn't good. But I mean, these are the experiences we learn from. I mean, I've had hard situations on the river. I've had hard situations paddling in the sea, and you never look forward to them. And there's never any guarantees, as we know in this sport. But this is kind of part of the deal that you make with yourself in doing something. Like, there's a sense of being alive, when you're doing something. And of course, we are all creatures of growth, and we want to improve and do better. But if that is what we're in it for, that's going to come with some painful moments. That's going to come
yeah.
with some moments that don't feel especially good, and some do-overs we'd like. So I think one of the things that I'm even working on at this stage of my life, I'm 56 years old, is, life is not a performance. Life is an iteration. Like, it's just a constant
Mm,
iteration. And I think trying to remember that and be aware of that, like, that's the trick. But I think when you see it as that, and it doesn't matter whether I'm writing an essay, or whether I'm getting, ready for a coaching call, or I'm getting ready to go out on a trail run, everything is an iteration. It's just an opportunity to learn and improve.
That's awesome. Yeah, and whitewater's a great feedback tool for, sometimes in life it takes us a lot longer to learn those lessons. But when you screw up in whitewater, it's pretty instantaneous feedback.
Well, what's really funny, I think for a certain generation of people, you probably remember walking into offices like in the 1980s and the 1990s, and there'd be these like framed photos on the wall, of like a rowing team that,
Teamwork.
said
Yeah.
like pull together, or,
Yeah.
and I have Olympic heroes who are rowers, but to your point, like I think rowing and pulling together is like a terrible metaphor for business and for teams.
Mm,
Like anyone that's ever been in a C2 or guided rafts, not everyone does the same thing all the time. Like different people do different things at different times. And to your point, we're adapting to a changing medium all the time.
right.
Business and life doesn't happen on a flat water lake like rowing
Yeah.
does. It happens on a river that is constantly moving and changing and has a lot of uncertainty to it. Currents speed up, they slow down, there's rocks, sometimes there's not rocks, there's bends, there's horizon lines. There's so much going on. And so life, I'm not very objective on this point, but life is a river, and teams that play together well on a river are the teams that perform well, also in life. I mean, and I
Right.
think if you look at even the business landscape that we're living in today, that has given us a ton of opportunities to accelerate businesses and to create, opportunities not just for yourself, but for employees and for clients and such. Yeah, the river is a much, much more effective metaphor than, pulling together on a flatwater lake.
Absolutely. What about low flow? What are some times in your life maybe you've had to step away from the sport for any reason? And what was that like? And how did you, kind of rediscover flow? And you can kind of let that flow into what you're doing now, currently to find flow.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things come up for me. I mean, one in the middle of that, my most intense competitive period was about a year and a half before the '92 Olympic trials. Horace Holden Jr. and I were paddling C1s together on the Teleco, and it was December of 1990, and we got on the water. We put on the water pretty late that afternoon. It was just the two of us. It was great flow, and I remember going over a little drop. I was a left C1. The boat was pointed left, and I hit the bottom, and I caught the upstream edge, and I just did a big brace out to my left side, and my bottom shoulder dislocated out, and it
Mm,
didn't go back in. And when I swam from the boat, the road is on river left, and I got pushed to river right, and that just set up like a series of complications. Like I was really scared in that moment. Like yes, it was painful, but the feeling of having let my C2 partner Scott down by getting
mm,
injured was really like, it was hard to get that thought out of my mind. Scott wasn't with us on the river that day, but that worry made it really hard for Horace to reset my shoulder. He couldn't get my shoulder back in. So
mm,
eventually Horace goes off help, and rescue squad comes back. There's much more to the story, but the short of it is the shoulder was out of the socket for 5.5 hours before it was
oh,
reset.
wow.
And yeah, it was just one of those really bad things. And then after that, I started that process of rehabilitation, initially just wearing a sling and doing nothing for a few weeks. But then, 6 months later, I was doing much better, competed at the World Championships in Slovenia. And Scott and I finished sixth place in those World Championships. But that was a really hard one, and figuring out how to use that time, not just to rehabilitate myself, but I really was thinking more like, okay, how can I contribute to my training group? You know, and I learned a little bit about coaching at a young age. I was also thinking, well, what can I be learning during this time? I watched a lot of video of my competition, of ourselves, and you know, I was also, when I went out to Colorado Springs to rehab at the U.S. Olympic Training Center, I went to the library every day and kind of checked out books on different topics, and a library dedicated to sports performance. That was really cool. And then the last thing I did was that, because I was living at the training center for about 2 or 3 weeks, I just knocked on every door and met every executive, every leader at the U.S. Olympic Committee. I just introduced myself. I was young. And those relationships proved to be really helpful in, you know, our funding. And, you know, when we started to perform well again, you know, if we were kind of on the cusp of getting funding or not, those relationships were really helpful in getting funded and supporting our Olympic efforts. So yeah, that was a really good learning experience, really hard, very, you know, painful in so many ways. But that was a time, you know, where I was removed from a training environment that I much would have rather been in on the water than watching from the shore.
Sure. But now take us into the current. Currently where you find yourself living and things you do to find the flow today.
Yeah, it is a great question. So I live in the Spanish state of Catalonia. I've been living here for 8 years now. I absolutely love it. I live in La Seu d'Urgell. In fact, right outside my window here, 50 meters away, is the 1992 Olympic channel where Scott and I paddled in 1992. And for paddling, for those of you that are watching on video, there are a couple of paddles behind me here. The kayak paddles are the paddles that my girlfriend Maria and I use when we paddle the surf ski out in the ocean and in the sea, which we love to do. That's something that we took up a couple of years ago, and it's so intuitive to whitewater paddlers that like surfing waves on rivers. I think surfing waves in the sea, that intuition is very similar. And Maria and I also paddle in a C2, and we do that on the river, and sometimes in gates, you know, sometimes, you know, just running the river for fun. But those are big things. I'm a 5-day-a-week runner, and running is really important to how I find flow on the water. Like, I mean, honestly, I think one of the kind of mission statements that drive me today, Brad, is this idea of seeing beautiful things from the water with Maria. Whether we're in a C2 or whether we're in a surf ski, you know, those are important to me. So my thinking is that the more that I'm in flow with the water, and the more that I'm leveraging the energy from the river and from the waves in the sea, that means more time that I get to spend on the water, expending less energy, which is kind of increases that chance of seeing more beautiful things together. You know, with Maria, which that's what makes me happy in the world today.
That's awesome. Are you ready to, well, no, first, before we run the rapids, flow advice. What advice would you give to new paddlers, and also advice you would give to re-emerging paddlers, people who have been away from the sport for a while and coming back to it?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about flow is that if you want to find it, like, it's great to set the intention on finding it and creating, you know, the container for moving into it. But it's a lot like a gold medal at the Olympics. No one ever wins a gold medal by thinking like about the gold medal. Like, you've got to let go of the goal in order to have a chance to get the goal. Like, you got to sort of move into the tactics and the strategies that are going to put you in a better disposition for finding flow. So it's really just kind of a letting go of the goal, you know, in order to find flow. And so, yeah, like, it's a sense of relax. It's a place you find yourself when you stop thinking about it. And, you know, and it's so counterintuitive, but it shows up in different ways. I was really moved listening to Payson Kennedy talk about this topic, you know, one of the founders of the Nanahill Outdoor Center. You know, Payson was a librarian at Georgia Tech. In his at 40 years old, just before founding the Nantahala Outdoor Center in 1972. And Payson did this on the idea of flow. Like it was no business plan. He was just,
Right.
he knew how flow felt. He was thinking how to put more people in a state of flow. But the way he talked about it specifically for himself was, number one, he would be in the library and like he would go be working on an assignment inside of the library, and he would talk about how something that took 3 hours would feel like 5 minutes, or something that took 5 minutes would feel like 3 hours. And he's like, aha, like that's a great feeling, like that's flow. And then at the same time, he was also leading these Explorer Scout trips on the Chattahoochee River and on rivers in North Georgia. And, you know, he just sort of noticed when he got out into nature, like flow just took care of itself. And so he was enamored with that topic. And so when he started the Nantahala Outdoor Center, he's like, oh, well, I know how to get myself into flow. He's like, the only thing I'm concerned about, you know, in starting up this operation is like how to get the other people around me into states of flow. And like, I just thought that was so fascinating, because you look at what the Nantahala Outdoor Center has become today, and, you know, whether, you know, I know that it's not owned by Payson Kennedy anymore, and it's gone through a lot of life and transitions, but it does a lot of good for the world and for the sport and for the outdoors. And it all started on an experiment of, I know how to get into flow. Do I think I can get more people into flow?
Yeah, its core is still the same. As big as it's gotten, it's still the base philosophy is still the same. Get people on the water, get them enjoying it, and get them in flow.
Yeah, I just think that it's so simple. You know, it's I see in the business world like, oh, I need a business plan and I need to map out a plan for scaling and all this. And really, I mean, I think the beauty of what Payson did throughout that time leading Nantahala Outdoor Center in those initial years was like, no, like the more present we can be in this moment,
Mm,
you know, the less resources, time, energy, and money that we're losing to the future means the more that we're investing into the present moment. And this is just like paddling the river. I was just
right.
writing this on a post on LinkedIn today. When you're on the river, the best thing you can do to prepare for what's around the bend is not to be thinking about what's around the bend, but to be present and to navigate the water you're on in
Hmm.
this present moment to the best of your ability. And the more that you do that, the more likely you are to continue that step by step, moment by moment by present moment. And to me, I think this is easy to talk about. It's much harder to do. But that's
Sure.
why I say set the intent to do it, create the space, the container to go there, and work on that practice. And if you find yourself gripping it or thinking about it too much, you know, you will learn how to like let it go and get it out of your head into your body, and you know, you will find those moments more and more and more.
That's really well said. Are you ready to run the rapids?
Yeah, let's run the rapids.
All right, put your skirt on, grab your paddle. Okay, so I'm going to throw out some topics, and you give me your Mount Rushmore. I'll give you 3 to 5 from each of these topics. Your favorite kayaks or canoes of all time.
So I think the Batmax. I mean, that just it's a C1 that John Lugbill and Davey Hearn designed together. What was so revolutionary about the boat is that in slalom, you know, you have the boats have to be a minimum width and a minimum length, and so that meant the hull of the boat met at the point of width. And what the Batmax did was that on the deck, it created these little bat wings to create
Hmm.
the width um, requirement, and they allowed them to make the hull of the boat more narrow and more fast. And that kind of innovation was so cool to see, you know, for a slalom boat. And yeah, innovation was just such a huge attribute of the training group on the Potomac River. And I think what Lugbill and Hearn did with the Max C1 generation was just incredible.
Okay. What about your favorite rivers of all time?
You know, in the 1990s, I became friends with the Long family out in
Mm,
Idaho. And they have a wonderful raft company and kayak school on the Payette River. And I went out there for the first time, I think it was 1994 or 1995. And Brad, I grew up paddling on the Potomac River. We paddled on the Nantahala and the Ocoee, all like great rivers. But I think all these rivers have in common are crowds. Like you were always with
right.
other people. And when I
Sure.
went out west and paddled this incredible whitewater on the Payette River, whether it was the bottom five of the North Fork or the canyon on the South Fork or the main Payette where they came together, I just couldn't believe how few people were on the river. And I'm
Hmm.
like, how can there
Yeah.
not be more people here? Like, this is some of the finest whitewater anywhere, and there's so few people. And that was pretty amazing experience, having been an East Coast paddler and embracing the crowds. Like, I love the people that paddle on the rivers that I mentioned before, but paddling without crowds, like, that was also an amazing experience.
Yeah, I got to go, several times out west, but one time went in an RV with three other friends, and we met up with locals to do runs. But literally every run we were on, it was either the four of us or the two locals that we met up on with. We never saw another soul on any of the runs, and we were running some of the classic, North Fork of the Payette, Big Timber Creek, whatever the case may be, and we were always the only ones there.
So special, so special.
What about favorite countries to paddle in?
Oh, it's such a good question. Well, being a slalom paddler, the sport is anchored in Europe. I think
Hmm.
one of the things that really surprises people, not just the size of the crowd, some of the crowds that we would paddle in front of, but the knowledge, the education of the fan base
Mm.
that was watching the sport. And I think, like in Slovenia, for example, at the course in Tacen, not only was the place packed, but like they know all the rules, like they know exactly what they're cheering for. Like that was always really, really neat. France also, where most every kid in the school system that goes through physical education is exposed to canoeing at some point in their
Wow.
youth. Like that also has an effect when those kids become adults and become parents and have families and they show up
Sure.
at a race. Like they have an understanding of like what it feels like to be in a boat. Hard to imagine a country where like most kids are getting access to a canoe or kayak at some point in their
Right.
youth. um, that's powerful for a country. So those are very special experiences, that like I still love to see in this country. By the way, here in Europe now, the competitions in Prague in the Czech Republic,
Mm.
that is like going to another level right now in terms of the publicity and the enthusiasm of the fans, the kinds of experiments that they're running to market the sport and promote the sport and do new
Oh,
things,
cool.
and a lot of innovation that's happening in the Czech Republic right now for canoeing.
What about the best paddlers of all time? Who you got on your list? Who's your Mount Rushmore of canoe or kayakers?
Well, boy, I mean, being a kid that grew up under kind of the tutelage of John Lugbill and Davy Hearn, as fellow athletes and teammates, very difficult not to name those two. Every C2 team that I ever paddled with, were just the Hawkshorners, the Howlers, the Jarvai, were incredible influences. But I kind of go back to the story, about my mom, becoming friends with Roger McEwen in the mid
Hmm.
1960s. And, for me, later in my life, to be teammates and training partners with Jamie McEwen, Roger's
Yeah.
son, that was amazing because, even my own heroes, John Lugbill and Davy Hearn, the way they revered Jamie McEwen, and
Sure.
then like to remove that step of John and Davey, and I got to be direct teammates, training partners, and friends with Jamie. Jamie is up there at the highest level. I also just would say that Donna Kloddick and Kathy Hearn, in very different ways had profound impact on my development as an athlete and the way I saw slalom, and very incredible teammates to have, in the 1990s as well, and 1980s. I couldn't have been more fortunate to have been teammates with both of them.
The last question is final flow. The river gods have come down and they said, Joe, you've got one more day on the river. So many times in life,
Yeah.
we do things for the last time and we don't realize it's the last time. But if you get to pick your last time, what river are you on? What boat are you in? And who's in your crew?
So I've got a bit of a different answer for you, Brad. And I mentioned that a couple of years ago, I took up surf ski, which is surfing offshore ocean waves in a kayak, specially made for doing that. And I have a coach for this activity named Boyan, who is a Bulgarian guy who lives in southern Spain in Tarifa, and this southernmost point of the European continent, and it's like a haven for wind sports. And there's a really special place very close to where the Atlantic and the Mediterranean come together on the Atlantic side. And when the tides, the moon, the winds are just right, there's in the middle of nowhere, about 2 or 3 kilometers offshore, there's a little space called Baheta that forms the most beautiful standing waves that you could imagine. And it's a lot like a surfing treadmill. Like you surf these waves, you go up against the wind and the current, and then when you get to the top, you just stop and you fall back down to the bottom and you just start and go again, and you repeat these cycles over and over again. And the waves, the shape of the waves there are just some of the most beautifully shaped waves in the world. In fact, if anyone can see the video monitor behind me, like that's Baheta right there. Like they're just beautiful. So my answer to your question, because of this spot only comes into play every once in a while, again, it's on so many factors, but once it does, you couldn't imagine finding it any other way except unless a local who knew it was there, took you to get to it. It would be impossible to find. And I would go there with that. I would be in an epic V8 double with Maria, and Boyan would be with us, telling us like how we could be doing better, even on the last ride. And that would be the place, the people, and the day. Like that would be a perfect ending to finding flow on the water. And I think also not lost on me is that I think for all of us that love the rivers end up in the sea eventually anyway. And, I'm glad to sort of be getting some exposure to that at this stage of life. And, I love the river. I've got more to do on the river. I want to contribute more to the development of what's happening on the river, but it's not lost on me that the river is going to end up in the sea.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, you've got a long time before that final flow, but that would be a pretty special final flow that you just described there. Joe, thanks so much for coming on B-Flow Sessions and for continuing to be a driving force and helping people find flow on the river and in life.
Thank you so much, Brad. And again, thank you for doing this. And I look forward to sharing the water with you again soon.
That would be incredible. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks for listening to this episode of B-Flow Sessions. Please take a moment and rate the show, give it a follow, and leave a comment. Also, if you could share it with your fans, your friends, your family, and everybody else in the paddling world, that would help the show grow and help more paddlers find and be in the flow.